The topic for our next workshop is corporate governance. A lot has been said and written about Enron's demise. Many of my current students are, however, not familiar with the events that occurred, and the surrounding circumstances. The lessons from Enron also remain relevant and can be applied to any organization. The intention behind this video is to make you think about the topic, and to provide background information that will ensure that we can have a lively debate when I see you in class. Stories of corruption, greed and wrongdoing, especially in high places, have always fascinated the popular press. Moral issues involving giant corporations and governments usually have major implications. Current events in South Africa, for example around the Zondo Commission, could form our future as a nation. Most stories around ethics and governance, however, do not appear in newspapers. They are stories that involve the mundane, moral challenges that ordinary working people encounter every day. Most people agree that corruption is a problem but have questions around the principle that justice must not only be done, but must also be seen to be done. What seems to happen most of the time is that people get away with wrongdoing. The perception is then created that bad is not really so bad, and that everybody does it, especially people in high places and positions of responsibility. The financial issues at Enron were indeed very complicated. Once one gets to the root of the issue, however, the wrongdoing is very easy to see. It involved deception, dishonesty, fraud, disregarding one's professional responsibilities and unfairly injuring others for personal gain. This lesson is true at whatever level the wrongdoing may occur. The jury reached a verdict on May 25, 2006. Kenneth Lay was convicted on all 6 counts of securities and wire fraud, and could face a sentence of 45 years in prison, as well as potential fines in excess of $40 million. He, however, died of a heart attack on July 5, 2006 at the age of 64. At the time of his death he was free on $5 million bail and awaiting sentencing scheduled for October. Kenneth Lay was born in Tyrone, Missouri on April 15, 1942. He was the second of 3 children. The family moved often during his childhood. Kenneth's father, a lay preacher, tried a number of different trades and business ventures. When Kenneth Lay was 6 years old, the family's chicken business went under when a large shipment of chickens was killed in a truck accident. Kenneth cut grass and delivered newspapers to earn extra money. He studied economics at the University of Missouri under Professor Pinckney Walker. His first real job, at the end of 1960, was with the Houston-based Humble Oil and Refining Company. He earned $13,000 per year. Kenneth married his college girlfriend, Judith Ayers. They had 2 children. Kenneth continued his studies at the University of Houston and obtained a Ph.D. In January 1968 he joined the Navy. After completing officers' school he was assigned to the Pentagon as an economist. He also served as Undersecretary of Energy in the Department of the Interior from 1972 to 1974. In the meantime, Professor Pinckney Walker, Kenneth's university professor, joined the Federal Power Commission. Professor Walker recruited Kenneth as his technical assistant. After a stint with the Florida Gas Corporation, and with his first marriage failing, Kenneth Lay moved to Houston in 1981 where he joined Transco, a pipeline company. During this time he married his second wife, Linda Phillips Harold. She was once his secretary at Florida Gas. Pipeline companies, including Transco, at the time, bought a certain percentage of the gas production at preset prices. The reason why these pipeline companies did this, was because of the expectation that gas prices would always increase. Pipeline companies accordingly committed to contracts with rising price structures. When oil prices fell in the early 80s, the price of gas dropped as well. The pipeline companies had, however, committed to buying gas at much higher prices. This affected Transco badly. In response, Kenneth Lay established a spot market for gas that would make it possible for the producers to sell gas directly to customers, without the need for pipeline operators and distributors. All this happened under the auspices of Transco. This strategy not only saved Transco, but also made Kenneth Lay somewhat of a legend in the industry. In May 1984, a smaller rival company, Houston Natural Gas, approached Kenneth Lay and offered him the job of chairman and chief executive. At age 42, Kenneth Lay found himself in charge of a major corporation. InterNorth, an energy company, approached Kenneth Lay, and proposed a merger between the two companies. This merger was finalized on May 2, 1985. The deal was financed through high-interest debt. This was a heavy burden on the newly merged company, renamed as Enron. In 1986, and after some internal power struggles, Kenneth Lay was in charge of Enron. As he climbed the corporate ladder, Kenneth Lay also became more politically connected. He had a close relationship with President George H. Bush. Kenneth Lay not only made large financial campaign contributions, but also headed some important committees. George H. Bush and his wife flew to Washington for his presidential inauguration, with Kenneth Lay, on an Enron corporate plane. In July 1990, and at the request of George H. Bush, Kenneth Lay helped arrange the World Economic Summit in Houston. He was often seen golfing with President Bill Clinton, and had a close relationship with George W. Bush as well. His opponents described Kenneth Lay as ambitious, determined, strong-willed and effective. Curtis A. Baer, the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, often disagreed with him on the extent and the speed at which the electricity markets should be deregulated. These arguments were mostly won by Kenneth Lay, with the support and the vote of his Republican government friends. Herbert notwithstanding described Kenneth Lay as a charming fellow, who always presented himself as such. Kenneth Lay helped create Enron in 1985, and transformed it from a relatively small pipeline business into a giant energy trader, worth $68 billion by 2000. At the end of 2001, Enron, however, filed for bankruptcy, following revelations of massive accounting fraud at the company. Some 4,000 employees lost their jobs and pensions. Bill Burton, a Texas lawyer who had known Kenneth Lay for more than a decade, compared Kenneth Lay to Icarus, the figure in Greek mythology, who managed to fly with wings made from feathers and wax, but who fell into the sea when he flew too close to the sun. Jeffrey Keith Skilling was born on November 25, 1953. On October 23, 2006, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison for his role in the Enron collapse. His sentence was revisited in April 2011. A plea deal in 2013 resulted in his sentence being reduced to 14 years. He was released from prison in February 2019 after serving 12 years in jail. Kenneth Lay recruited Jeffrey Skilling in 1988. Skilling was a McKinsey consultant at the time. Lay and Skilling reshaped Enron. They changed Enron from a pipeline distribution business to a trading business, initially trading natural gas and later, electricity. The question is, where was the board when all these irregularities were happening at Enron? How was it possible for two people, namely Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling, to do all this alone? Why did Enron's board of directors condone the dubious accounting practices? The board, for example, voted, not once, but twice, to allow executives to pursue personal interests that ran contrary to those of the company. According to Enron's 2000 annual report, the board consisted of 17 directors. The other directors on the board claimed that they did not know about the company's risky accounting techniques. A 60-page Senate report, however, found that the board of directors ignored warning signs, and allowed the high-risk practices that led to the company's collapse. The board chose to ignore questionable management practices to the detriment of shareholders, employees, and business associates. The board, according to the report, did more than just ignore the warning signs. They knowingly went along with the company's high-risk accounting and off-balance sheet deceptions. Enron played a dominant role in the field of energy trading, and became America's seventh biggest company. Wall Street loves growth, and Enron was its darling. Enron was seen as dynamic, innovative and, of course, profitable. Enron's share price increased dramatically in value. Over a period of 3 years, Enron's share price increased by 40%, then by 58% in the year after that by an unbelievable 89%. The fact that many people did not really understand how Enron made its money, did not matter. All that was important was that it made money. Even when the company's demise was evident, Kenneth Lay was still trying to convince Enron employees of the stock price. At the same time he, and his co-executives, were selling their own shares. The question can be asked, where was Wall Street during all of this? Why didn't analysts pick up on the problems brewing at Enron? Isn't it part of a stock exchange's responsibility to protect investors? Enron's demise highlighted the conflict of interest with regard to Wall Street analysts. These analysts are paid according to their ability to arrange investment banking deals. Enron was known as a deal-making machine. Only a few days before Enron filed for bankruptcy, just 2 of 16 Wall Street analysts that covered the company advised their clients to sell their Enron shares. When Enron filed for bankruptcy, it became evident that the company's strong financial position was an illusion, and that most of its financial success was hype, and far removed from reality. A mere 2 months before its collapse, the company's market value was still reflected as $28 billion. Enron had always made its financial records and accounts as opaque as possible. Enron created a financial structure with some 9,000 special-purpose entities and used these entities to move many of Enron's own activities off its own balance sheet. These 9,000 entities were supposedly independent from Enron. Using a web of off-balance sheet partnerships, Enron managed to hide $1 billion debt from investors and federal regulators. When Enron was compelled to redo its financial statements for a certain 3-year period, the company's profits dropped by $600 million, and its debts increased by $630 million. Enron's auditors should have noticed these accounting irregularities. Both Arthur Andersen, the company's external auditing firm, and Vinson & Elkins, the company's law firm, however, had signed off on many dubious deals. Of course, they made large profits for themselves in the process as well. Arthur Andersen, a company that had been in existence for 89 years, was more concerned about auditing and consulting fees than the validity of the financial statements. When the scandal broke, a partner at Arthur Andersen even went as far as shredding incriminating documents. It came to light that certain large banking institutions were also part of the Enron fraud, by participating in the manufacture of the company's fraudulent financial statements. The banks used complex financial schemes to boost Enron's cash flow, to match its growth on paper. Enron, for example, recorded bank loans as prepaid trades of natural gas and other commodities. Enron obtained financing in excess of $8.5 billion, over a period of 9 years, from Citibank and J.P. Morgan. This obviously generated a lot of income, in the form of fees and interest payments, for these banks. 5 other investment banks had similar deals with Enron, to the tune of another $1 billion. Some of the banks also allowed investors to rely on Enron financial statements that they knew were incorrect and misleading. Citibank was later required to pay $2 billion to Enron's shareholders. Fortune magazine voted Enron America's most innovative company, for 6 years in a row. Enron also proudly referred to itself, not only as the world's leading energy brand, but actually the world's leading company. Can, and should, the media be held liable and accountable for adding to the hype? After the demise of Enron became public knowledge, Richard Lambert, the editor of London's Financial Times from 1991 to 2001, stated that it was very difficult for an outsider to detect fraud within a company. The financial statements that were published complied with the required legislation, and was open for all to see. Journalists also do not, in the normal course of business, have access to a company's internal books. Having said that, he acknowledged that the signs were there for all to see. It was public knowledge that the Enron executives had been selling their shares for all they were worth. The link between Enron and the obscure off-balance sheet partnerships was also quite evident. Research has indicated that market forces tend to drive media behavior, causing them to go along with the flavor of the month, and creating a collective blindness on the part of the business press. An argument can be made for the fact that outside investors did not have insight into what was happening at Enron, and that they could not have done anything to prevent the losses, amounting to billions of dollars, that they eventually suffered when Enron failed. But consider this, the retirement fund that acted on behalf of Enron employees, invested money directly in Enron shares. Enron employees lost, as a result of this, more than $1 billion, when Enron's stock value fell to a few cents per share. Shouldn't such a major investor, using the pension funds of Enron employees to invest in Enron shares, have acted with more care and diligence? The employees entrusted their pension and retirement funds to a fund that invested the money, on their behalf, in Enron shares. Surely the fund, as a major Enron shareholder, and investing on behalf of its members, and with their future at stake, should have taken more care, acted more responsibly, and should have asked more questions. The role and responsibility of regulators also need to be taken into consideration when it comes to the demise of Enron. Without going into detail, the USA does have legislation, regulations and regulators around listed companies, accounting principles and processes, law firms, accounting firms, analysts, and related bodies and professions. A question that comes to mind is, where were the regulators in all of this? Could, and should, the regulators have been aware of the happenings at Enron? What red flags existed at the time? Why was nothing done sooner? Who is regulating the regulator? Is more regulation possibly needed? Political connections helped ensure the passing of deregulatory measures, in favor of the energy giant. The more powerful Enron became, the more money it gave away to political candidates, and political parties. Enron was one of the largest contributors to federal candidates by the year 2000, and spent millions of dollars lobbying Texas officials. Attorney General John Ashcroft, and Texas Attorney General John Cornyn, were some of the top officials that benefited from Enron contributions. Out of the 248 members of Congress sitting on 11 House and Senate committees, who investigated Enron's collapse, 212 had received money from either Enron, or its accounting firm, Arthur Andersen. Kenneth Lay was personal friends with 3 presidents, namely George H. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. At a seminar on energy, all the delegates addressed Dick Cheney as Vice President Cheney. Kenneth Lay, however, called him Dick. Michael Lewis's book, The Big Short, Inside the Doomsday Machine, was published in 2010. In 2015, the movie version of the book won an Oscar. The Big Short tells the story of a number of American financial professionals, who not only predicted the housing and credit bubble that occurred in 2007 and 2008, but who also profited from this collapse. The movie not only explains the events leading up to the financial crisis, but also shows the conflicting morality issues experienced by several of the men who foresaw the crisis in advance. Although the banks and creditors were convinced that the housing market was stable, Michael Burry, a hedge fund manager at Scion Capital in the movie, created a credit default swap that allowed him to short the housing market. The following scene from the movie demonstrates how unwilling bankers, and investors, were to see the danger, and the risks, associated with the subprime home loan market.
We're not advertising our short position, right? We don't want to spook everybody. Can you do that? I know you got a big mouth, you like to run it. Can you just keep it shut for a few days?
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll play nice.
Ladies and gentlemen, business is good. Profits are strong, and the mortgage continues to be the bedrock on which this economy is built. And yes, we had to take some losses in our subprime department last year, but those losses will be contained at only 5%. Now, in our residential sector, our rollout of those variable rate packages were gobbled up by the consumers.
I have a question, please.
Sir, the Q&A is after my statements, but you know what? You seem anxious.
Thank you.
How can I help you?
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Would you say that it is a possibility or a probability that subprime losses stop at 5%? Thank you.
I would say it is a very strong probability, indeed. So, back to the residential sector. When we rolled out the new variable rates package...
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Zero. There is a 0% chance that your subprime losses will stop at 5%. Zero. Excuse me. I have to take this.
He must be from Bank of America.
Yeah.
The people who foresaw the collapse of the home loan market, and who took the correct steps, made a lot of money, while many homeowners lost their homes. The following scene highlights the moral issues around this topic. Ben Rickard, a retired investment banker, played by Brad Pitt, reminds those who benefited financially, that the crisis destroyed the lives of many people. This in turn, should remind us of the tremendous responsibility that people in decision-making positions owe to the ordinary man in the street.
Deal. We need a deal, right? A deal. We need a deal we can afford. We need a deal that they're not going to refuse. So what can we do? We can... The AA tranches. What if we bet against the AA tranches? Who's not going to take that bet? We know that they say they're 95% AAA rated, but in reality, they're more like 25%. Some of them are 0%. We also know that if the bottom tranches fail at over 8%, the upper tranches are affected. They go to 0. I'll bet you right now that those AA's are actually like B's.
I rarely ever say these words, but I think Charlie's right. Look, Ben, the payoff is 200 to 1, but they're all taking the ratings at face value. So they're charging pennies on the dollar to bet against the AA's.
Just when I started thinking you guys are clowns. No one on the planet is betting against AA. The banks will think we're either high or having a stroke, and they'll take every dime we have to offer. Kind of brilliant.
This is what we did that no one else thought of. Not even Baum or Berry thought to short the AA's. But we did. Little brown hole capital.
So we're interested in shorting some of the AA tranche of CDOs. Come on, guys, what's the aim?
I've got no angle. We're new to this. We're just so we want to do 15 million in swaps on the AA tranche.
I don't understand.
You can buy as much AA tranche as you want.
40 million against the AA.
Brother, I will sell you as much as you want.
You understand perfectly, Bob. Want the deal?
That's cool. That's all right with me.
Do that. Stop. Stop that. Charlie. Oh! Stop it. Stop.
What?
You have any idea what you just did?
Oh, come on, we just made the deal of our lifetimes. We should celebrate.
You just bet against the American economy.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which means, if we're right, people lose homes, people lose jobs, people lose retirement savings, people lose pensions. You know what I hate about banking? It reduces people to numbers. Here's a number. Every 1% unemployment goes up, 40,000 people die. Did you know that?
No.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
We were just excited.
Just don't dance.
Teo Bota is a South African shareholder activist. As such, he has queried many companies in the area of good corporate governance, ethics, executive compensation, environmental practices and black economic empowerment. He generally feels that the South African corporate governance guidelines are too lenient. Teo Bota first decided to pursue shareholder activism after he made an investment in the Sage Group, a life insurance company. The company was making huge losses in the United States, but refused to disclose this to South African shareholders. He spends time going through company financial reports to note discrepancies. He then questions the companies concerned about these discrepancies, normally at the company's annual general meeting. He owns a single share in a number of companies. In this manner, and as a shareholder, he then has the right to attend the company's annual general meetings where he can pose his questions. According to Wikipedia, Teo Bota has, in this manner, confronted some well-known companies, including the Sage Group, Sopi, ABSA, Sasol, Sabmiller, Pick n Pay Stores, Tiger Brands, Avusa, Anglo Platinum, Pretoria Portland Cement Company, Mutual, and Federal, Bidvest, Wasizwe Platinum, and Liberty Holdings Limited. This section contains extracts of an interview with Teo Bota with CNBC Africa on January 18, 2019. He talks about how compliance and non-compliance reporting differ between King 3 and King 4. Teo Bota also highlights the responsibilities of the board of directors. Teo Bota then refers to the rights of a company's shareholders. In the last instance, Teo Bota comments on the possible responsibilities of a large shareholder that mainly holds shares on behalf of smaller investors. The example that he uses here is that of the Public Investment Corporation that invests money belonging to the government pension funds.
So when King 3 came out, it was apply, and if you can't apply it, then you explain the reason. King 4 comes out and they've changed it. They say apply and explain. You need to comply, and once you comply, then you explain the reasons how you've complied.
Right.
Okay. And those are the respective principles. Whereas King 3 was quite simple. It was comply, but if you can't comply, all you have to do then is explain the reasons why you don't comply. That was a lot easier under King 3 than it was under King 4. So let's say you read an integrated report, now you get this volume of comply and explain, instead of just getting to the nitty-gritty of where they don't comply. So where they don't comply, then you can engage with them at an AGM or engage with them behind closed doors as to the reasons why they don't comply, and then you can get to the nitty-gritty. Well, I'm not really a fan of the King 4 code. I like the UK code for good governance. I think it's a lot stricter, a lot harder. I think it actually forces people to comply. The other issue which I don't like about King 4 is the issue of a non-binding vote in terms of the REM policy and the REM report. I don't think it really goes far enough to actually get directors or REMCO to sit up and take note. Prior to them listing on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, I think they listed in around about 2015, they were listed on the JSE. And once they listed on the JSE, they fell under the King 3 governance code. It didn't just suddenly happen in 2017 that there was suddenly this non-compliance or there was this so-called fraud or whatever. So you've got to look to your board, and you've got to look at the board and say, well, shucks, where was the board in all of this? You have the board, I mean, they're ultimately responsible for ensuring that they adhere to, let's say, the King 3 code at that time, or the Dutch code when they listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. But then you have the shareholders saying, have you done all this? So the shareholders then need to ask the question, yes, you do say you've adhered to King 3 in terms of the integrated report, but we want to question this, 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 and this. So, for example, I would question the fact that, let's say, Len Koner, he was the chairman of Steinhoff, he was on the board since 1998. Sure. I would question the issue of a person being there for a very long period of time and his independence. So what you need is, in terms of holding companies to account, in terms of good governance, you need a more robust debate from your shareholders to hold them to account. So what the shareholders have to adhere to is the Code for Responsible Investment, which is CRISA. So CRISA is written, and then they should then account to their constituents, which are the man in the street who invests in those pension funds and provident funds. For example, Government Employees Pension Fund invests with, or gives their money to the PIC, and the PIC manage it. In terms of that, but the ultimate person in terms of who puts money in are the actual government employees.
Absolutely.
So how do they hold the Government Employees Pension Fund to account, and how does the Government Employees Pension Fund hold the PIC to account? Well, what we need to see is a more robust debate from the shareholders, We need the shareholders to hold the board of directors to account. What we don't see that in the public domain. So your asset owner or asset manager would engage with the company behind closed doors.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, they've got to draw the line and say, look, we're not getting anywhere with engagement.
Yeah.
Let's now go and attend the AGM and let's raise these issues, maybe in a public forum,
Yeah.
to actually get to the stage. Then you have to step back, and one other thing that the Code for Responsible Investment has got is that it actually says that when asset owners and asset managers actually vote, they need to put that vote out into the public domain. Then you can have any NGO or any person from civil society to actually hold them to account in terms of their voting. So if you see the PIC vote for a remuneration policy,
Yeah.
and you think that remuneration policy is flawed,
Yeah.
you can then take them on and say, PIC, I don't really understand how you voted for this remuneration policy,
Yeah.
because look at the flaws in terms of that. Yeah, and that gets made public, and then the PIC will say, shucks, we need to apply our mind better here, or we need to put more resources in terms of this voting,
Yeah.
because we're not really getting the voting right. Well, I don't know. I think maybe if the PIC, I don't know if they're lacking in terms of their governance for holding companies to account. They might need to put more resources to this issue. So in terms of how it actually works, the Government Employees Pension Fund places money with the PIC. The
Yes.
Government Employees Pension Fund is the biggest asset owner, and they put their capital and their funds with the PIC, which is the asset manager.
Yes.
So if they feel that the PIC is not performing in, let's say, a responsible manner,
Yeah.
they should hold them to account.
Yeah.
So maybe the Government Employees Pension Fund, if maybe the Government Employees Pension Fund needs to hold them to account and say, well, we're not happy with X, Y, and Z. This is what we want to put into place, whatever that might be. So I think in terms of the composition of their boards, they would
Yeah.
have, on the representation, they'll have probably a government representation, they'll
Yeah.
probably have a union representation,
Yeah.
they'll have a representation from civil society, but maybe they don't have enough representation, because does the government employee actually know how the PIC is actually voting?
Yeah.
Does he really understand those returns, because it's so big? But is there a forum for an employee to meet with the board of directors of the Government Employees Pension Fund
Yeah.
and say, well, I'd like to hold you to account?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of anything like that.
The period from 1990 to 2008 has been described as the era of cowboy capitalism. It seems as if the list of scandals has since then only increased. Many people cynically resign themselves to what seems to be a fact of life, and a way of living. Unethical behavior, in business and in personal life, seems to be a given. During the workshop we will consider a chosen business entity as the basis for our discussion. We will create a timeline to summarize its operations, from when the business started to the present. With a clear understanding of what the business actually does, we will then define its business model. We will apply all the criteria outlined in this video to critically assess the corporate governance and ethics of the business. We will obviously give specific attention to the regulatory requirements, such as King IV and any relevant legislation, and compliance measures. Milton Friedman and others have stated that the ultimate goal of all business activity is and should be the maximization of profits in the interest of the owners of the business. According to this approach, the focus should be on increasing shareholders' wealth. We will critically consider this point of view against the backdrop of recent and current events. We will also take this discussion into the future. What will businesses and work look like in the future? What additional challenges will the future pose in respect of corporate governance, compliance, and business ethics? Is capitalism, as an economic system, providing the correct answers to how we, as a society, manufacture, produce, distribute and consume? I trust that this overview and background will cause you to think about the topic for our next workshop, and that we will not only be able to adopt a practical approach, but also have a lively and constructive debate that goes beyond the mere rules and regulations. I trust we will, from a regulatory compliance point of view, be able to go beyond how things are currently, and progress to the what it could and should be like. Business schools have been criticized for producing some of the monsters that have captained the industry to date. Both Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling had respected business degrees. It seems that we need more than just qualifications. Damon West tells the story of the coffee bean. Life is often like a pot of very hot water. It can be a harsh, stressful and difficult place. We often find ourselves in an environment where we face conditions that really test us. The question then is, what are you? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? A carrot is weakened, and softened, in hot water. An egg on the other hand becomes hard. Facing difficult circumstances can in a similar manner, weaken us. Or it can make us hard, in the sense of not caring. When a coffee bean is placed in hot water, it changes the water, to coffee. Being like a coffee bean allows us to change and transform the environment. I am really looking forward to see you in class.